What child is this who lay to rest on Mary's lap is sleeping?
Hey guys, welcome to Christmas 365, Day 2. And I want to share with you why we should celebrate Christmas 365 days a year, not just December 25th or even just in the month of December, but that we can find reason to celebrate 365 days a year. Christmas. Isn't that awesome? You know, I got a confession to make. If you don't know me, if you don't know my history, I was once a resident of the Florida Department of Corrections. And in the Florida Department of Corrections, bread was a hot commodity. You've heard that term, bread and water. Well, I didn't necessarily give you bread and water, but bread was definitely a hot commodity. You like to eat your bread. You know, bread fills your stomach up, especially if you didn't have any food or money for canteen, stuff like that. Bread would go a long way. And you know, I've come to really love bread, and I've had to eat a lot of bread in my life. And you know, it got me thinking today, man, the Lord just laid, you know, I was kind of seeking Him and asking Him what Day 2 was going to be all about. And He brought across my path bread. I was thinking about the Israelites out in the wilderness and how manna, bread from heaven, dropped down and was delivered to them, and how, you know, they had it in abundance, and yet after a while it was just, you know, just bread. I mean, it didn't taste very good. You know, I don't know that I can get sick of this bread. This is Hawaiian bread, which is really awesome. But the bread they had was just, they said it tasted kind of like olive oil. And so it didn't have a lot of flavor. And so they got tired of it and they began to grumble. And they began to remember all the things that they had way back in Egypt. And they began to wonder why they were brought out into this desert. Well, you see, in Jesus' day, they weren't too far off from that grumbling. You see, Jesus has a little discourse with His disciples and with some of the Jewish people of His day in John chapter 6. As a matter of fact, they ask Jesus, they say, what must we do to do the works of God? You know, what do we got to do to be Christians? You know what? Tell us what it is, and we'll just do it. And so Jesus tells them, He says, you got to believe on the one whom the Father has sent. That is what it is to do the works of Jesus. Now listen to this. They said, so they asked Him, what sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you? Now, if you know anything about the context of this chapter, Jesus has already shown them all the proof that they need to know that He is the Son of God. But they still ask Him, what signs are you going to do? And what will you do? Our ancestors, now get this, ate manna in the wilderness, as it was written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat. Now they're bragging on this. Little do they forget that when they had the manna, it became just commonplace, and they griped about it. Jesus said this to them, very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it's my Father who gives you this true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. True bread comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, always give us this bread. And Jesus declared this. He said, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will not go hungry, and whosoever believes in me will not be thirsty. A few verses down, it says that Jesus said, for I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but to do the will of Him who sent me. Bread from heaven. Come to give life to the world. Come to do what the Father had sent Him to do. Now the funny thing is, of course, there's always a Pharisee in the crowd. There's always somebody ready to argue with Jesus. Okay? And so they start up this argument. Oh my gosh, he's saying he's the bread from heaven. This is blasphemous. All right? And Jesus even stops them in their mumblings and begins to address them. He says, "Very truly I tell you, the one who believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna." Jesus sets them straight. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, and they died. They died. But here is the bread that comes down from heaven, which anyone may eat and shall not die. Bread from heaven, come to give life, come to do the will of the Father. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. I mean, isn't that just spectacular? I mean, get it, right? He says, I am the bread of heaven. I am the bread that came down. I am the bread that came down to give life to whosoever eats of it. God's provision in Genesis and Exodus and the Old Testament, a reflection of Christ and who Christ is and what he was coming to do. A baby born in a manger came from heaven, a little nugget of bread that grows into a large piece of bread, comes to give life to the world. And then Jesus does this funny thing, right? He sits with his 12 disciples and he takes a piece of bread and he breaks it and says, "This is my body. Every time you gather together in my name, do this in remembrance of me." That's a Christmas story for you. That's a Christmas story that we can celebrate every day. You see, we get caught up in the idea of celebrating a birthday or baby, or Jesus, the bread from heaven, came to earth to give life where there was only death. You think about that 365 days a year. That is worth saying Merry Christmas to somebody in the middle of July. Christmas, 365 days a year. It's not about getting presents. It's not about giving presents. And you know what? It's not even about being with your family. We love to do all those things. We love to get stuff. We love to give stuff. We love to be with our families. That is not what Christmas is about. Christmas is about bread that came from heaven for starving people who were dying, who were perishing. It came from heaven to give them life. Bread in a manger. Christmas 365. May God bless you and Merry Christmas.
Whom shall